Well, hello and welcome to this special broadcast on CNBC TV 18. Now, ASCI, which is the self-regulatory body for the advertising industry, came out with its annual complaints report 2023-2024. It's thrown up some interesting details, especially with respect to advertisements which are found to be misleading. In the scope of the 12 months, over 8,300 ads were scrutinized by ASCI, and of them, various ads were found to be violative of statutory norms. In fact, 39% found to be violative of statutory norms, 81% found to be misleading, and a heavy concentration of these violative ads in a few sectors, such as the healthcare space, the F&B segment, the offshore betting sector. Concentration of these ads in these spaces. To learn more about this report and what it entails, about the way forward, we're now joined by Manisha Kapoor, the CEO and Secretary General of ASCI. Ms. Kapoor, thank you so much for joining us, for being a part of this conversation. Diving straight into the annual complaints report 23-24, just want to get an initial assessment. What are the nature of violations that you've seen over the last 12 months?
As you would see from the report, a lot of our work is now focused on digital. So digital violations contribute to a bulk of our work. So close to about 85% of complaints this year or, objectionable ads were spotted on digital. So that's been a big shift, I would say, in the last 2 to 3 years, where we have seen digital becoming an increasing part of our work and, the space where we see violative ads. I think healthcare, continues to be in the top 2 or 3 categories for the last 3 years. This year it's kind of topped the table. So we see that as something which continues to be a concern. And of course, newer concerns like offshore betting and gambling ads, which have really kind of made their presence felt in the last months.
Sure. Let's break up some of these numbers that the report has thrown up. First, the nature of the violations themselves. When we talk about violative ads, what are we talking about? Are we talking about misleading advertisements? Are these harmful products being advertised, illegal services being rendered? If you can give us a breakup of these violations in the advertisements that you scrutinized.
That's right. So, the ASCI code basically looks at 4 kinds of violations. So we look at misleading ads, which is the bulk, of the work that we have done this year, comprising of more than 80% of the ads that we have seen fell under the misleading category. Then we had basically ads that can be considered to be harmful. And about 34% of the ads fell in that category. So ads can also fall under multiple categories. The same ad may have multiple kinds of violations. But it was these 2 categories that, made up the bulk of complaints. We also look at ads that may be unfair in competition or ads that may be denigrating to certain segments of society. So those are the kind of violations that we look at an overall level. But as I said, misleading ads really dominates at more than 80% of the total work that we do.
I also want to bring in the concentration of these advertisements in a few sectors. You mentioned the healthcare space, the offshore betting sector, the personal care space, seeing an unusually overwhelming concentration of these violative ads in these sectors. Tell us more about that, as to why there's a concentration of these ads in a few particular sectors.
So we see, there is obviously certain sectors which, are focused in terms of, where we have observed over the last few years more violations take place. So those obviously become an area of priority for us to monitor these ads as well. And essentially, we, as we are seeing these, certain sectors kind of where we are seeing the violations come much more. And we are tracking now these sectors. So we sometimes do sweeps across these sectors. In some cases, we are also seeing a lot of advertisements in these sectors. So, for example, in personal care, we just see a lot of advertisement out there. We are seeing a lot of influencer activity. So those put together, form also a significant part of what we are doing. So it really depends, I think, on just the volume of ads out there. And plus, of course, in a sense, the lens that ASCI puts on sectors that we have found to be in violation over a period of time.
Fair enough. One of the issues that you had raised is that how there's a concentration of these ads now in digital media. That's what ASCI is, in fact, increasingly looking at. Tell us, over the last few years, has there been a spike in digital advertising, and the fact that there may not be as much of a scrutiny as far as digital medium is concerned? Is that contributing to even greater violations on digital media of advertising norms?
I think certainly one is seeing a huge volume of ads go out on digital. When it was TV and print as the dominant mediums, then of course the number of advertisers who could be on these media were also limited because they kind of demanded huge budgets. But with digital media and in fact people having even their own websites or even their own handles where they are reaching out to consumers.
Sure.
It would be fair to say that there is almost an infinite number of advertising pieces out there. So certainly, I think just the volume of advertisements also then contributes to digital kind of showing up big time in terms of violations.
You mentioned influencers as well supporting many of these products, and that appears to have been one of the consistent trends that you've seen as a part of this annual complaints report. I just want to invoke some recent commentary that fell from the Apex Court itself. The Supreme Court was hearing the Patanjali matter, and while hearing the matter, the Supreme Court said that we want to expand the scope into the larger domain of misleading advertisements, and to that end, had very clearly pointed out as a part of its order, written order, where it said that celebrities and influencers are equally responsible, equally liable, that their conduct is responsible for buying decisions by a large chunk of the population, and therefore there is some responsibility that rests on their shoulders. They need to do their due diligence. Just want to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so endorsers have their liability, which is laid out under the Consumer Protection Act, and that liability is separate from the liability that is there on the advertiser or the agency. So I think it is recognizing the fact that many of the endorsers have bring in their own audiences into the brands, and therefore there is no getting away from their own responsibility in this matter. The law provides for endorsers to do due diligence if they wish to kind of get away from liability. But as far as we have seen and the evidence that we have is that when we ask celebrities and endorsers for any evidence of due diligence, we often find that they are not able to provide that to us. They usually have indemnity from the advertisers, which is saying that if the ad gets into trouble, then I'm sure the advertisers are kind of paying for any financial liability. But we feel that that is not enough because due diligence is a separate exercise where you understand whether the claims that are being made in the ad where you feature, are they correct or not. And I think that is something that we definitely should expect celebrities to do. Sure. And it is also something that they need to do as per the law of the land.
Let me also follow it up from a different perspective. You've mentioned that there is due diligence required to be done by celebrities and influencers. What about the regulatory mechanism? I go back to this Supreme Court order. It had said that there's an entire chapter dedicated in the Consumer Protection Act to the CCPA as well as misleading advertisements, and said there is need for greater vigor and intensity in terms of regulatory action. Is that what is required? The fact that there are increasing instances of these advertisements, these misleading advertisements, points towards perhaps a lacuna that needs to be corrected, more vigor, more intensity by the Consumer Protection Authority?
I feel that, any regulatory mechanism on advertising has various parts to it, right? So the first level of it is the self-regulation, where we are able to address about 80 to 90% of the issues at a voluntary level. And that is good news for consumers and for the industry because, those ads are typically taken off much faster because, obviously any legal procedure, would take a longer time. And, so that I feel becomes the first level of protection that is offered to consumers. Of course, for willful offenders, for repeat offenders, the full force of the law must come in, and that is the reason why these laws are enacted. And I think this together, so self-regulation and regulation together actively playing their role, can address these problems to a large extent. And the provisions of the law are to deal with people who are willfully kind of violating, the codes and the rules of the land.
Fair enough. Just a couple more questions to you, that in light of the fact that this is a voluntary exercise in terms of disclosures being made, is there perhaps a need for a greater oversight here? You mentioned that as a part of this report that there were violations of even the Drugs and Magic Remedies Act. There are consequences that follow there. is there a need for greater scrutiny and oversight, given the fact that this is something that affects large chunk of the population and their buying decisions?
Yes, so I think any ads that deal with the healthcare sector, are particularly sensitive and definitely need scrutiny from all stakeholders. So I mean, for ASCI also, healthcare is a sector that we monitor quite closely, and we look at all kinds of violations, including those that fall under the Drugs and Magic Remedies Act. So I think yes, I mean, healthcare is a sector that. Just given its importance and the role it plays in consumers' life, needs to kind of particularly be truthful rather than, untruthful. So I think whatever steps can be taken by all stakeholders, so whether it's the education of consumers, whether it is the training and education of companies who operate in healthcare, whether it is calling out the violations that are being made, so all of these really need to work in tandem to make the healthcare sector, I think, safer in terms of its advertising.
And one final question, speaking of greater oversight, now the fact that the Apex Court is widening the scope of those Patanjali proceedings and looking at the larger scope of misleading advertisements, is this something that should be welcomed by the advertising industry? And perhaps there needs to be greater cooperation with the Apex Court in implementing this oversight and regulation?
Yeah, well, I think, advertisers who are honest and would like the industry to be honest, I think, welcome guardrails of any sort. So whether they are at the self-regulatory level, whether they are, at the legislation level, because that commits, everyone to the same standards. So I think from, if I speak about, by and large, the industry, is compliant. There would always be, in any kind of sector and in any kind of matter, always be the exceptions. So I think, yes, the industry, would kind of welcome guardrails to keep their own businesses honest. And I think honest advertisers would welcome that.
Right, Ms. Kapoor, thank you so much for joining us and sharing more light on the annual complaints report. We hope to continue this conversation and learn more from you as this development progresses. Thank you so much for joining us and being a part of this.
Thank you.